Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builders Supply. In this video is to bring you a closer look at the Cal Royal number SH-140. They call it new SH. They've been calling it new for years. It's obviously some sort of redesign over the original SH-140. But it's an SH-140 or SH-140. 4.5 spring hinge in a US3 finish. This client has ordered two. So we're shipping them two. There happen to be two in a box, so there's one box. The unit price is per hinge, not per box. Most hinges are priced per hinge, regardless of how many are in a box. The box just happens to be the way they package it. If you had an 8-foot door and it was non-fire rated and you were putting 3 of them on that door, you'd obviously have a box with only 1 in it. So it makes it handy when they sell the hinges to price them each, because you don't always need to order hinges in even numbers. So this is a spring hinge from Cal Royal. This is a 4.5. This is going to be very typically and commonly used, most commonly on 1 3/4 thick fire rated doors. And I say fire-rated doors because it's a 4.5. It's a 4.5 by 4.5. What door thickness are you installing it on? 1 3/4. Most likely. Okay, you won't install it on an 1 3/8 door. On a 2-inch or 2.25-inch door. My point is, when you get outside of 1 3/4, you're probably dealing with non-fire-rated doors. To put a spring hinge onto a door that's not fire rated, that would be great. You just simply want the door to close behind you. You might have an office door that you want it to just simply close when the door is not being used. But most likely it's a fire rated door. And it's a fire rated door, and you are therefore mandated to have it self-closing, enter the spring hinge, versus the door closer. We'll use spring hinges over door closers for a variety of reasons. It might just be cost. And I can certainly understand cost, no doubt. And we'll talk about further in this video why a hinge may not be the best option or may be the only option. Back to this hinge. So this is an SH-140. This hinge is in US3 finish. That means 3 things. Well, US3 doesn't mean 3 things. If they called it 632, which is polished brass, it would mean 3 things. But US3, we know that this is made of steel. The US3 is the US number. If it was the BHMA number, it would tell us that it's made of steel with a polished brass finish. The US3 number doesn't tell us the base material. People will apply US3 to items that are of any base material. You can get sprayed aluminum on plastic, and they'll call it, they probably wouldn't call it US3. But the fact of the matter is, the US system doesn't differentiate base materials. The BHMA system, Builders Hardware Manufacturers Association, equivalent to US3, would either be 632 or 605. Because this is made of steel, it would be 632. That tells us 3 things. Number 1, it's made of steel. Number 2, it's a polished brass plating that's on that steel. And then finally, there's a lacquer over it to give some protection to the polished brass plating. Okay, this hinge is 4.5 by 4.5. It's really important to know that the height is the first dimension. It's 4.5 inch tall. It also is 4.5 inch wide. You need to know that because not all hinges are square. You could easily order spring hinges that are 4.5 by 4, or you could order wide throw hinges that are 5 inch by 8 inch. The point is that it's important to know the height is the first dimension when you're prepping doors and frames. If you were doing a job that had 4.5 by 4 spring hinges and you prepped your doors and frames for 4-inch tall hinges, that's a problem, because the height is the first dimension. It runs opposite of how doors run, is the bottom line. This is going to be available in other finishes from Cal Royal, and I'm going to pull that up here. It's all going to be steel based, and that's because this is a hinge that is labeled finishes. US 10, I'm looking at it on a screen here. US 10 for satin bronze, US 10A for a antique bronze, 10B for oil rub bronze, US 15 satin nickel, US 26 polished chrome, 26D satin chrome, US 3 polished brass, US4 satin brass, US5 antique brass, USP for prime coat, and then they can do it in a 32D, an 11th option. That would mean that it's a stainless steel based material with a brushed finish. That hinge would be stainless steel. US32D or 630 is the most durable of natural finishes that you can produce. I can't tell you that the spring is going to be coated at all any differently from this hinge, and I fully suspect that it's not. If you're looking for a spring hinge and you are installing it in an exterior application, honestly, I would steer away from the import line, because they have not coated the spring of that to be equivalent to corrosion resistance as a solid stainless base material. So be mindful of that. If you're looking for 32D for the finish, you're matching other 32D or 630 finish, then great. Interior applications, not a problem. But that spring's going to be the same as any other steel-based spring. Now, why are you going to use this? Well, obviously you want the door to self-close is why you're going to use it. This has the Cal Royal logo, and Cal Royal has changed their logo over the years. It's gone from small to really big to just kind of big. I would really appreciate that the logo was smaller. Too much corporate advertising on your hardware. Nobody wants that. I would make it a bit more elegant. I have nothing against this logo. I'm just against excessively marking the product with your company name. This has a lot of other information. There's nothing that can be done about this. This has to be on here. The reason this must be on here is because it's mandated by code to be on there. Meaning, if you are doing a fire-rated door and you are using hinges to close that door, that spring hinge, if you have a fire-rated door and you're using spring hinges, that spring hinge must be labeled. Labeled means that it bears visual evidence, as does this, that it has been subject to a test, a fire test, and has been found in accordance with that test. And that is the visual proof that this hinge has been tested and is found to have passed that test. If it's a door closer, your door closer doesn't have to be labeled. It does have to be listed. So two terms. We have labeling and listing. If it has a label, there is a listing, meaning in the testing laboratory, in this case UL, Underwriters Laboratory in Northbrook, Illinois, they can go to a filing cabinet or a computer drive and pull out the evidence of the test. Yes, that Cal Royal SH140, we subjected it to a 3-hour fire test and it passed. You are now, Cal Royal, authorized to label your product as compliant with the terms of the test. Cal Royal puts that stamp on that hinge leaf. So what's interesting is not all hardware must be labeled, meaning visual evidence, but spring hinges must be. They must be. Be mindful, if you're doing fire-rated doors and you're doing spring hinges, not every spring hinge that you can buy is labeled. If it's not labeled, it's not. You don't have a fire-rated door, is the bottom line. The hinge would probably work in a test. Maybe it wouldn't. Who knows? Because it's never been tested. So you're only going to use products on fire-rated doors that have been found compliant with the requirements. So that's what all of that is for. People will call up and say, hey, I've got the part number. It's an R13329. It's not. All of this information on here is evidence tying it back to the factory's record keeping, is the testing laboratory's record keeping. So let's look at the template. There's a link below this video to the template that will give you all of the dimensional properties of the hinge. We've already gone over the 4.5 nature of it. You can see that the hinge is 134 thousandths thick. That means that it is a standard weight hinge. The hinge is a standard commercial weight hinge, and my caliper tells me 0.130, 0.130, and that's certainly within tolerance of what you would find. You can do, in the world of hinges, there's residential weight, about 96 thousandths. Standard weight, about 134 thousandths on this size hinge. And then heavy weight, which would be 180 thousandths. If it's a spring hinge, you're dealing with standard weight, or 134 thousandths. That's important for you to know when you're prepping the door and frame, or you're replacing hinges, you do want to make sure that you're replacing it with the same thickness of leaf. You really won't, you will not really won't, you will not find hinges in the 180,000s, but you will certainly find spring hinges in 3.5, 3.5, 4x4, 4.5x4, 4.5, 4.5. I don't know that we'll get them in any larger sizes though, but that's generally what you're dealing with. Now, that template, if you are replacing an existing hinge, by all means confirm that that matches the pattern of hole locations that will allow you to make a simple swap of the hardware. In a 4.5 inch tall hinge, it would have to be a really old hinge for you to find a pattern other than that. That standardized pattern called the template pattern has been certainly a standard since I think about 1970, just standardized across the board. So be mindful that I would expect what you have to match this. If it's 4.5 tall, you get into a 4 inch tall, then you've got a lot of options in terms of the location of those screw holes, meaning there's several different patterns of those in a 4 inch tall. Now there is also a link below this video to the installation and usage guide. Before we get to that, let's go through the rest of the extended description. We are looking at, Cal Royal is telling us that this hinge must be purchased in quantities of 2. You can order any quantity that you want. We will ship you 3 or 5 or an odd number. So not to be worried about that. ANSI listed, UL listed, made of steel, 134 thousandths, 8 holes for screws. Speaking of screws, you're going to get all machine and all wood screws. So you're going to get 8 of each. You're covered there. Obviously in a complementary finish, made of steel again. Okay. 1224 is the common thread type. Is the thread type for this type of screw. It's a flat. It's a flat head, but it's undercut, where it's not completely a flat head screw. It's undercut so that it will allow you to permit the screw to sit flat when you're dealing with a thinner material. The thickness of this material is not thick enough to allow a true flathead screw to sit flat. That's why they're undercut. That can be demonstrated by looking at the screw at the bottom, where the root of the screw hits the underside of the head. It's flattened off there. That's what the flat part means. The wood screw is a number 12. 12 by 1.25 inches generally is how those are. Now we're going to get into the installation instructions, and all of that is in the installation and usage guide. Okay, it's all there. The box itself, their packaging, gives you the table by which to determine how many you need and how to install it. So when this material arrives, you really only need the box. However, before you order the material, you certainly do need to refer to the table to determine what's the guideline. How many should I order? Let's go over that first, since that will help you determine what you're doing. The bottom line is this. If it's a fire-rated door, the maximum code will permit door height-wise is 7 foot. If you have a fire-rated 8-foot door, it's not an option to be code compliant and install a spring hinge. If it's 7 foot, you're great. If it's 3 foot, you're great. Bigger than 3 foot, taller than 7 foot, you've got to go to a closer to be code compliant. Which, you know, to be code compliant means to be safe, to be building your opening using those constituent parts that have found to be compliant, have found to have passed the standard by which they're measured. They've passed the fire test. It's okay to use them. A product that's not, or an application that's not, is not okay to use it because it does not permit life safety. 4.5, 4.5, or 4.5 by 4. 70-pound doors, you're dealing with 2 spring hinges and 1 butt hinge. Really up to a 115-pound door. 2 spring hinges and a butt hinge. 150-pound doors, then all spring hinges. In my experience, a typical 3070 metal door, wood door, you're dealing with a 115-pound door. You're always going to see 2 spring hinges and a regular butt hinge. That regular butt hinge needs to be ball bearing. That regular butt hinge needs to be mounted at the top hinge location. Your spring hinges will be second and third location. Don't put a spring hinge at the top. That's not where they belong. They never go there. Your ball bearing hinge, not a plain bearing, but always install a ball bearing hinge there. The reason is because 70% of the weight of the door is actually borne by that top hinge. A spring hinge is not a load rated product. They are not meant to carry the load of the door at all. Even though they obviously do. They're not engineered for that. They're engineered to close the door, and that's what they do. So that's why you avoid that top location. You'll simply find that the door doesn't efficiently work as it would as well as if you repositioned them bottom, second hinge. Obviously, if you're dealing with a heavier door, maybe for some reason if you had 16 gauge hollow metal doors in your stairwells in a condo building, which is, I've never sold a 16 gauge door for that application. But if you had a door that was heavier, or your calculation of door weight leads you to an area greater than 115 pounds, obviously all three spring hinges. It's important to understand that you must use that hinge when you're mixing spring hinges and non-spring hinges, that it be ball bearing, and that it be the same gauge. It should be a standard gauge hinge, meaning you wouldn't put a heavyweight hinge, because the vertical axis of pivoting needs to be compliant or exactly compatible with other hinges. When you deal with hinges that have different leaf thicknesses, you alter the geometry. If you're in your mind's eye, imagine a vertical line, a plumb vertical line going through here. It alters those geometries, and the door doesn't swing compatibly when you have mixed leaf thicknesses. So be mindful of that you must use a hinge that's 134 thousandths. Small amount of tolerance, but you're not going to find a 4.5 as 150 thousandths, even though that would work. So you have to use the same thickness. Don't mix heavyweight and standard weight, or standard weight and lightweight is the bottom line. They do give a table for 3.5, 3.5, and 4x4. You simply follow those guidelines. And those limits are set by NF. They say NPFA. That's a typo. It's NFPA. NFPA 80 is a standard. When it's adopted, when NFPA is referenced in local building code, it becomes part of the code. It's code. So the NFPA is a standard by which, building commissions, authorities having jurisdictions, municipalities, cities, the whole nine yards, derive their building code. They draw on these resources. NFPA 80 literally states this information. So and that's why it's being copied and carried through, because your local building code is going to refer to that document, bring it into code, and then it becomes code. 2 spring hinges is also mandated as a minimum requirement for fire doors. You would never have less than, even if you would never have less than 2 spring hinges. Weather stripping, extreme window air pressure on one side of the door may require the use of maximum amount of spring hinges. For best results, use all spring hinges. Those two lines together. Cal Royal sells spring hinges. I'm a spring hinge salesman. Doesn't mean you need all spring hinges. In applications where you don't have weird or disparate pressure situations, just go by the table. Condo building, 5 floors, stair towers on either end, stairwells on either end. Spring hinges are good in those applications. People rarely are taking the stairs, right? So as long as those doors close and latch, you've got a fire-rated door. Where you want to consider all spring hinges is when you have an exterior of a residential unit, fire-rated or not. That door needs to close and latch every time. There's an intercom, there's an electric strike. They're using spring hinges, which they shouldn't. The point is you will have a changing environmental situation over the annual cycle. Meaning, in the summertime, the windows are open, and that air is going to race through that corridor where that exterior door is at. And then in the winter, it's going to be different. All the windows are buttoned up, the air pressure is different, and you can adjust that spring hinge over that annual cycle. The point being, when you have more spring hinges rather than less spring hinges, you have a greater ability to control the opening, because a spring hinge does not provide control at all. It's really nothing other than a controlled fall, so to speak. And let's talk about the difference between spring hinges and door closers. Now, our discussion about spring hinges and door closers. A spring hinge really does nothing other than, when the door is closed, stores energy, releases energy. That's based on the tension set on the spring. So, more or less stored energy will be released when you close the door. But all that the spring is doing is just closing the door. A door closer will have hydraulic control, or pneumatic control, but hydraulic control, where you can tailor 0 to 10 degree, roughly speaking, 0 to 10 degree, 10 to 80 degree, 80 to 120. You can tailor 180 all the way basically down to about 10. You can really control these in the sense that you can effect management over the duration of time that the door will move through those different arcs of the closing cycle. That's control. That's I would say that's control. Though all you're doing is slowing it down or speeding it up. That's really all you're doing. But you are controlling it. You have a decision. With a spring hinge, your decision is based on how much tension do I put on the spring hinge to get the darn thing to close and latch. Your control is limited to getting the job done. Getting the job done is getting the job done. Doesn't mean that you can control that. You can't slow it down and still get it latched, and you can't speed it up and still get it latched, even though you can a little bit. Too slow won't get the door closed and latched. Too fast may cause the door to bounce back open. So a door closer, a proper overhead surface door closer, overhead concealed, floor closers, that's control. That's always the way to go with a door that you must ensure is properly closing at all times. Whether it be an exit door for security purposes or whether it be a fire-rated door. You need it to... There are 2 cardinal rules, really 3. Door must be free-swinging, door must be self-latching, door must be self-closing. And you need all 3 of those for a door to be a fire door. A spring hinge is a tool for a certain application. That interior stairwell, not a lot of use, no wind conditions generally, air conditions happening. That's going to reliably close those doors. But if you are dealing with a situation where you really have to ensure that the door is going to reliably close every time, then you might want to consider the proper equipment. And that would be a door closer. Now let's take a look at the instructions for setting tension. That is on our instruction sheet. The bottom line is this. There are different manufacturers who do it different ways. With this manufacturer, you can do it. You can do it either way. What I mean is, you're going to get a tension rod. That's this round rod. You're going to get a tension wrench. For every order you place, you'll get one of these. In this case, they're sending you both. With this client who ordered 2 hinges, they're only getting 1 rod and 1 Allen wrench. These 2 tools do the same job. For every hinge that you order, you'll get a tension pin. This client ordered 2 hinges, so there are 2 tension pins. The way that this all works is by using either the tension rod or the tension wrench. The rod gets stuck in the tension collar. You'll notice there's not one here. That's the tension collar. Or you can insert that wrench up into the top of the barrel. Either way works the same way. You insert that into the collar, and then you turn it clockwise. Turn it clockwise. As you turn it clockwise, you reveal a new hole. It's into that hole that you drop the tension pin. Simple. That's how it works. That's how you set tension. Okay, so they say, they give a description. They show the tension pin, they show the tension rod, they don't refer to the tension wrench. Caution, always rotate the tension over to the left regardless of right or left-hand doors. That's true. What they're not saying is the tension collar must always be installed at the top of towards the top of the door, not at the bottom. You can install it at the bottom, just reverse the installation instructions. When they say left, they mean clockwise. So turn it clockwise. If you're installing it upside down, which is okay, turn it counterclockwise. Follow the installation instructions in all events, in spite of what I say, because under the duress of a fire door audit, the inspector could technically find you out of compliance if you installed it this way, upside down. Because why? That's not the way the installation instructions say. So be mindful to follow those instructions. Another interesting aside to that is, question came up in a seminar I was in, question has come up online. If I have a fire-rated door and my door closer is missing its plastic cover, am I out of compliance with the fire rating of the door? The answer is yes, you are. That plastic cover doesn't do anything but melt in the first 2 minutes of a fire test. But it's not the way the installation's instructions called it out. So, with the tension collar pointed up, rotate clockwise, drop a new pin. Continue to work that over to the point where you've got a properly closing door. Important at the top, do not exceed 3 holes if you're going to 180 degree. Don't exceed 4 holes if you're going to 90 degree. Okay? You hear creaking on that spring hinge, you better back it down. Although you won't really hear that if you are adjusting it per the outline given. Obviously, the adjustment, I think, becomes self-explanatory as you go through time and you want to adjust it. You might have something slamming too hard or not latching enough. You can adjust that with time. I would think that the spring will certainly fatigue a small amount with time. Maybe not store as much energy as it once did. You will want to... the tension stopper, they call it. They don't call it a tension pin. You want to install that as flush to the hinge barrel as possible because you don't want projecting hardware. You don't want that pin hanging off of this. Put it down flush with this. If you need to pull it out, which you might need to maybe get in there with a very small set of needle nose. I have had, actually, interestingly enough, a lawyer call and say that someone was being sued. And they were being sued, the contractor was being sued. It was a retail application, dressing rooms, department store. A child leaned up against the back of the hinges and then started to just slide down. Their back was against the projecting tension pin and gouged their back. So be sure to put that flush and flat inside of there. You don't want, projecting hardware is is always unsafe regardless of the type of hardware when it's unnecessarily projecting. Notes at the bottom, we've discovered the reality of what we're talking about NFPA, and the rest of the installation instructions are self-explanatory. We've exhausted all of the information in the extended description and can finally say, if you have any questions on the Cal-Royal SH140 hinge or any other Cal-Royal product, please feel free to reach out to us. There is a link below this video to the manufacturer's page where you can pull up not only all of the Cal-Royal products that we sell, but also a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog. If you have need for good quality, reasonably priced, commercial and some residential hardware, I would take a look at Cal-Royal. They are relatively a well-oiled machine. I have relatively few issues that, cause the need to have correction behavior engaged in. It's a good quality product, very fair price for what it is. They are staffed with a whole mess of people that answer the phone, and they will definitely help you and work on it with you, and they will definitely call back. A reasonably predictable, reliable company. I have been selling their product for 20 plus years, and I continue to do so. What differentiates them from every other company who just imports hardware, and there's a lot of them, there's too many in my opinion. You can buy an imported door closer from dozens of people. Why do you want Cal-Royal? Why do you want someone over someone else? And it really becomes customer service. I'm not buying a spring hinge from Cal-Royal. I can buy this from 20 sources. I'm buying it because of the service. It is a good quality product at a fair price. That's going to be fairly true of everyone, but it's that service that we have to have in order to successfully complete the sale. And Cal-Royal does deliver that at an above average rate. Any questions on the SH140 or any other Cal-Royal product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.